Good afternoon. So I'd like to start by asking all of you to imagine a scenario. Pretend you're an employee of a software company. I know, that's really hard for most of us in this room. You receive a video call on your phone from your CEO using a regular messaging application. During the call, you can see that the residence they are sitting at is a residence you've seen them at before. And your CEO says, hey, I need you on an urgent online call. Let me send you a link now. Would you click it? I probably would. And I think a lot of people here would if we're not kind of thinking about like some of the advances that we're seeing now in today's society. But this is really just one real scenario from last year where a cyber criminal impersonated a CEO of a software company in a deepfake video to an employee. And there are many more like this that have resulted in millions of dollars in losses for individuals and businesses. And this is just one example of how advances in artificial intelligence have changed the game when it comes to how cyber adversaries and criminals operate and how defenders respond. I'm really excited to be here today to explore recent lessons learned from all of our efforts of countering malicious actors' use of AI alongside Sherrod DeGrippo, Director of Threat Intelligence Strategy at Microsoft, Adam Maruyama, Field CTO for Digital Transformation and AI at Everfox, and Lynn Brown, Partner with the Cybersecurity Practice at Wiley, Rein. Sherrod, Adam, Lynn, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, this problem is so much more complicated than just this example. Let's talk a little more about how Gen AI has accelerated how cyber adversaries are conducting their operations. Sherrod, what are we seeing from nation states?
So we have significant research that shows that all of the big four, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, are leveraging things like LLM tools and generative AI to further their operations. What we see them doing is what most of us in this room do: research, refining communications, translations, looking things up essentially in a lot of ways, or generating content that they can then use for things like social engineering or some kind of technical reporting. We also have seen them use it to improve and enhance their code, much like GitHub Copilot or any of those tools that look at code. Obviously, they're trying to get better there. All of that said, we don't see threat actors at this time using AI for something that they couldn't do a little slower on their own.
That's a really good point. Adam, I know, is this really the same on the criminal side? You and I were recently talking about, I think we were geeking out and maybe a little bit freaking out about self-contained criminal LLMs and some of like the new reporting around that.
Yeah, I think for the most part, criminals, as Sherrod mentioned with APTs, are trying to trick people, not machines, with AI, which sounds like a good thing, and this tracks with reporting that the UK's NCSC did in 2024, predicting significant uplifts in social engineering and reconnaissance capabilities thanks to the use of generative AI. So what this means is they're aggregating data to increase the timeliness and credibility of the phishing emails. So it's no longer your long lost great uncle suddenly needing your bank account information. It is someone saying, hey, this is your child's preschool, and that preschool is right. We had a water main break. To read more about that incident, please click on this link, and that link sends you to a page with malware, something like that. But that's not fully a good news story because that's a very believable email. And there has been an exponential increase since the release of ChatGPT in the quantity of these emails. So I think greater than 1,000% in phishing emails. And if we think about phishing related domains, I think those have increased about 120% again since the advent of ChatGPT and generative AI. One of the things that we're concerned about, that Cynthia and I have been chatting about, is that there is emerging evidence of technical capabilities that make it easier, lower the bar of entry for technical exploitation through the use of criminal LLMs. So this started about a year and a half ago with a University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana study, where just based on the CVE descriptions, not any kind of detailed code, they were able to generate proof of concept attack code on, I believe, against 8 of the 13 vulnerabilities that they tested. I believe 3 of those, of the 5 that failed, were also CV description was written in Chinese, so there's a translation issue there. More recently, we've seen custom private AI models like, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Xanthrox AI, which have local resources, a little bit harder for big commercial AI LLM vendors to take down. And they're claiming to have custom models and basically create a Metasploit, for those who have been around long enough to remember Metasploit, but powered by AI.
I think, all of this is so interesting, and thinking about where we see the widest adoption, it sounds like more in the enriching, right? Like what they're doing now, or the use cases where you almost see them playing around. At the FBI, we really monitor this closely, and I think we've seen the widest types of use cases among China and cyber criminals, but really, as you noted, Sherrod, everyone's doing, really all of our adversaries are looking and seeing what they can do now. So on the flip side of this, for example, I think I can think of at least one case where we identified a new adversary, especially their persona, because they were using similar methods to try to get around AI models' guardrails, actually. And so really all of this looks a little different, it feels a little different, and we anticipate adversaries aren't going to follow the same playbooks as before. This really has wide-ranging repercussions, from how we detect adversaries to how we conduct technical disruption operations, to how we use existing laws to prosecute or stop AI-enabled crimes. Lynn, when it comes to cyber actors, the most prevalent use of AI, or at least one of them that has tended to show up in Department of Justice indictments, is the use of AI to help create fictitious profiles at speed. Would you walk us through a specific way that an actor's use of AI has increased risk to companies?
Sure. So we're seeing a fair amount of it with the DPRK remote IT worker fraud cases, where individuals are using AI to enhance identity documents, often stolen identity documents, frequently of U.S. persons, where recruiters are using AI to enhance LinkedIn profiles, all of which is to try and trick U.S. organizations into hiring these remote workers from North Korea to help fund some of their nuclear programs and otherwise evade sanctions. So what the government's been able to do is rely very effectively on pre-existing criminal law. So the use of AI, of course, in and of itself is not a crime. The use to facilitate a crime is still part of the underlying criminal conduct that can be prosecuted. So in the DPRK remote IT worker fraud cases, we're seeing them prosecuted using things like identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, sanctions violations, things that the government is very adept at prosecuting. And so the legal tools, certainly on the criminal side, exist to combat this kind of malicious activity with AI. I do want to say there are civil tools that are being used as well, and Microsoft has done quite a unique job of using civil tools to go after malicious cyber actors as well. A lot of the criminal statutes that the Justice Department is using often have civil provisions as well. So the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act has a provision, as well as some of the copyright and trademark laws, where companies who have been victimized can sue for injunctive relief or monetary damages, sometimes punitive damages as well.
I think in a lot of our brains go towards, what you're talking about now, and think of the kind of North Korean IT problem, and, how that has really affected a lot of businesses around and thinking about some of these things. Now, to footnote one of your points, it's been easier to identify how existing laws apply in cases like these when actors use AI as a part of their operations that were already going to be criminal activity in nature. But it has been more difficult to determine when and how to investigate activity when actors' use of AI is really the main event. And this has been especially poignant with synthetic content or deepfakes. We've really seen people initially approach, like, how are we going to look at deepfakes in investigative context in two ways. One is some see that bad guys are lying, and you assume that authorities have the authorities to investigate. Others see fake content and assume that laws that apply to real content don't apply here. And obviously, both of those aren't quite right. It's a lot more complicated than that. For example, just because someone's criminal, manipulating or generating a fake video or other media wouldn't necessarily be a crime. Fake media can still be protected by free speech, so FBI has had to look at a lot of factors before taking investigative steps, like whether a video was made or uploaded in the US or by a foreign provider, citizen, as well as whether a video violates a law, like impersonation of a federal official or wire fraud. But fake content can still violate real laws. Take, for example, child sexual abuse material. I'll refer to it as CSAM. Some early media reporting actually came out a few years ago erroneously, stating that such imagery wouldn't violate US law. I assure you, it most certainly does violate US law. Just last week, a 53-year-old man in North Carolina pleaded guilty to possessing over 20,000 images and videos of AI-generated CSAM. He also possessed, though, over 8,500 real images. We see this a lot, people possessing both real and fake types of this material. But even if no actual real child is depicted in any of this, it's still against the law. The Child Pornography Prevention Act of 1996 covers visual depictions that have been created, adapted, modified. The PROTECT Act then goes further, that's from 2003. It notes the government doesn't even need to prove that a minor even exists, and covers visual depictions of any kind, including a drawing, cartoon, sculpture, or painting that would depict such activities. I gave it the years of those to think really about like how far back we can go and where AI wasn't really a thing, but in 2003 and 1996, people are passing laws, and those laws do apply to these contexts today. But just because both fake and real or even manipulated CSAM are against the law, it's still incredibly important for us to have the right tools to determine and be able to parse through voluminous fake content so we can identify and quickly rescue victims. If we can't tell fake from real, it's going to take us a lot longer to actually be able to help real victims, and that's a big issue. So I think we've recapped, and Lynn and I have been able to go through some of these criminal laws and significant risks to individuals and businesses that have increased as AI has advanced. But turning over to you, and Lynn mentioned this a little bit, Sherrod, Microsoft's taking these actors to court?
Yes, well, Microsoft does enjoy taking actors to court. So I think one of the things that's really unique about Microsoft is that we have a real commitment to disrupting threat actor behavior. And in the case of our DCU, or our Digital Crimes Unit, we did submit a lawsuit in Virginia against a threat actor we refer to as Storm 2139, which was using Microsoft services and products to create deepfake images and then defraud people using those images. That case is important because it shows that misuse of AI products and services, misuse of Microsoft services for fraud and criminal activity will result in potential legal action. And so that's something that we've committed to in terms of disruption to the best of our ability. Microsoft wants threat actors to stop. I'm in the threat intelligence space, and something I always make sure to tell people is if your threat intelligence is not actionable, it's threat entertainment. And I love threat entertainment, but it's not making the world safer. It's not making the world more secure. So make sure that when you're looking at how you're leveraging threat intelligence, what is that end goal? And for Microsoft, the end goal really is to reduce threat actor activity and make the global internet safer.
I'm definitely going to steal this threat entertainment line. I love it.
Threat entertainment is fun, but
Right.
it doesn't make you more secure.
Exactly. Well, I mean, maybe going beyond even the entertainment or intelligence aspect, to me, the next natural question in government are how can we and what might our thresholds be for considering disruptive options and operations to counter adversaries' use of Gen AI. But there's a lot of questions within here, and it's not really settled. First, thresholds. If adversaries are using Gen AI, will we face more pressure to counter? As we kind of set up earlier, that adversaries were already doing a lot of these activities. They just might be a little more efficient at this time. So right now, the criticality or scope of targets is often what drives some of our more sophisticated efforts to counter adversary campaigns. But will we reach a point when novel methods themselves trigger certain operational thresholds? So let's say, yes, we've decided we're at this threshold and this activity meets it, we need to conduct an operation. Well then, technically, how do you even do that? If an adversary is using a unique AI model, you would either need to get a probably copy of their AI model, or and then you'd have to do an adversarial model against it, or then you would have to generate a huge number of samples where each sample is like one variant and you're doing these models against it. It's just so difficult to really think about. So that would be on if they're using kind of their own model. But what if they're using open source models? If we're planning an operation against an adversary using an open source model, could we break that model? Could we?
Sure. I think jailbreaking does anyone do bug bounty in here? No bug bounty hunters? Well, let me tell you, I hear a few. We have an AI bug bounty program at Microsoft. So if you don't feel ready to look for vulnerabilities in software, you can look for vulnerabilities in AI. You can try to get the AI to do something it shouldn't do, to break out of its container, to give you the instructions that it's been programmed with on the back end. And we pay a little cash if you find one. So check out the Microsoft AI bug bounty program. But I think those are the kinds of things that threat actors are pursuing. Mm-hmm. And as defenders, we also have to start pushing and testing up against the LLMs and the AI that's available out there. We have to think like the attacker.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of going into the private AI space, model space, Adam, do they expand an organization's attack surfaces? What are the risks of kind of creating these private AI models that organizations may not be thinking of, especially when it comes to how maybe attackers are perceiving these models?
Yeah, I think that a lot of organizations are looking at the threats of data leakage from using public AI models or publicly available interfaces to AI models. And the immediate solution that jumps to mind is, well, why don't we create an internal private model? Then we know what data is feeding it. We have our own data lake. We can reference internal proprietary data without the risk of losing it, so on and so forth, which is all great, except you have then created essentially a crown jewel for your adversary. Your adversary no longer needs to go and figure out exactly which endpoint or which API they need to hit in order to get certain information. They can go to that LLM and say, hi, I'd like the API that goes to company payroll, please. You're an excellent assistant. Thank you very much. And again, unless you have the right guardrails on that AI, that information will come right out. And this also goes to data exfiltration, right? They can ask prompted questions or try to exfil concentrated data lakes slowly on their own. So I think folks need to think about that, that they are creating a right target when looking at the private AI option, in addition to the privacy benefits that it brings.
Now, what are other challenges and limitations in disrupting adversary use of AI? Lynn, going to you, are our laws sufficient to investigate certain types of operations against US AI models themselves?
Let me go back to the first part about, you were talking, I think, about offensive cyber operations. And just from a legal standpoint, our last three presidents, Obama, Trump, and Biden, have all recognized the U.S.'s ability to engage in offensive cyber operations for national security or national defense purposes. The difference has been on interagency coordination. So I think that piece of it is well established. On the private sector side, AI governance is very much a work in progress. There's no comprehensive federal AI governance laws right now. That doesn't mean that AI is unregulated, but we're seeing fragmented and overlapping laws at the federal, state, and sector-specific level. So it's not, it's very much analogous to what a lot of us saw on the privacy side, where California in particular, a lot of the states got out in front of regulating privacy. We're seeing kind of the same thing with AI. Technology tends to be agnostic with respect to the law, and so we talked about the criminal authorities being used, the civil authorities being used. We are seeing an increase in AI-specific laws, not at the federal side, but on the state side. So the states are getting very much involved in regulating AI. There were about 700 proposals last year. I think there are now pending laws in about 40 of the 50 states that we have. California is out in front on AI, just as they were with privacy. So they're certainly an entity to watch. Colorado has actually enacted a very comprehensive AI framework that doesn't go into effect until February of next year, but it has disclosure requirements, consumer notice requirements, reasonable care requirements, and that may end up being a bit of a de facto standard down the road. I think we are seeing somewhat of a galvanizing impact on deepfakes, because 34 states now have laws that criminalize deepfakes. 4 have just passed in the last month alone, so New Jersey, South Dakota, Virginia, and California. But I do want to address the federal side. Just recently, as of yesterday, the Take It Down Act was passed by Congress, so it had passed unanimously in the Senate in February, and then by a vote yesterday of 409 to 2 passed the House. So it criminalizes the non-consensual use of sexually explicit deepfakes. And it's considered the first major law that's trying to tackle the AI harms that can result from the use of deepfakes. And it also requires providers to take down content within 48 hours of being notified. So you have to see social media start to gear up processes in order to adjudicate and effectuate those complaints.
I think that's such an interesting example, because it really took almost like celebrity attention to get to that point of being able to tackle what new technology is doing and figure out like ways to protect citizens. I think it's been really interesting from the Bureau side to look at how we're investigating certain types of attacks against models themselves, because they don't always fit into the neat buckets that we've put things into the past. I think something like where an adversary is trying to ask a model 10,000 questions, 15,000 questions, and it's an open source model, and it gets into sticky, like that's trying to steal parts of the model. But where and what might the laws it be breaking do, and how do you investigate that? And there's certainly areas where I think exploring further, and as some of these models advance, it's going to become even more critical for us to kind of understand that adversarial mindset, to actually know how we need to protect. What else do we need to protect? Sherrod, Adam, do you have any ideas?
Well, at Microsoft, one of the things that I find just incredibly fascinating, and whenever I see this team around the office, I always sort of pull them aside and ask, what's going on? We have an AI red team, and so as a traditional red team looks at your software, your hardware, your architecture, your people, and tries to find weaknesses, simulating what a threat actor would authentically do. We do the same for AI. We have a very large AI red team, and They do things like see if they can get the AI to give them instructions to get a child to smoke cigarettes, or to do something like create the recipes for certain bioweapons. And one of the things that leads to is none of the people at Microsoft know how to make bioweapons. So we have to find people who do know how to do those things, that have that background, and are able to confirm, yes, the AI is doing something it shouldn't be doing, and this is the accurate formula for sarin gas. So understanding what potential misuse we could see from AI using the AI red team before we release those models out to the public is super, super important. And I think for those of you who are talking to AI vendors or looking for AI solutions to bring into your environment, ask them, do you have an AI red team? Is the AI red team testing this? On and on and on testing it and making updates and pushing those out frequently so that you know and can have a predictability around what your particular product will do.
Adam, any additional kind of thoughts here?
Yeah, no, I just think it's important to think about AI as an entity, right? It is, at its base, yes, it's a piece of software running in your system, but it also becomes this font of knowledge, and especially as we move toward agentic AI, toward AI with decision engines, really keeping an eye on what that AI is doing and treating it almost like an employee of your company.
That's so smart, and it leads us into, I think, the next part of our conversation, a little more around defense and, how we can do certain elements to really try to counter some of these AI threats across our networks. Sherrod, maybe you can go a little further into some of the other ways Microsoft's looking at how to use AI to defend against AI.
Sure. For those of you who maybe have been around a while, AI used to be called machine learning and data science. Does anyone remember that, when it was not AI? It was machine learning, data science, nerd stuff. We have been using machine learning and data science for years and years and years in a variety of the Defender detection products. And that has given us a speed, scope, and scale that we didn't have before. And I think that really is what AI can provide you, is acceleration and speed when it comes to detection, particularly when it comes to detecting anomalies in malicious behavior. And I'll give one more example. I think for those of you that look at vulnerabilities or have anything to do with code review, one of the biggest issues that we face in technology are our besties, software engineers. They like to hard code creds. They put those credentials right into their code. And you can go on GitHub and you can look at projects that have usernames and passwords hard coded into the application. Now, one of the best uses of AI is to go through and find those. One of the best things to do is to pull those credentials out. But let me ask you right now, if you needed to write a regular expression to find hard-coded credentials in code, how complicated would that regex be? Because I'll tell you right now, you can't just say username, password. You need to say certificate, key, cookie, API. And then the authorization and authentication pieces and mechanisms are different. At Microsoft, we have 41 different auth types. That's just at Microsoft. So using AI, you can say, go through this code base, find me anything that looks like a hard-coded credential. It takes the work of code review from objective to subjective and allows for natural language code review, which I think is something that software engineers who may not have security as their top of mind first order focus will then be able to self-serve more secure code and a more secure development lifecycle.
And taking that further, what if you have a lot of different types of AI in your environment? What's one of the things that you would recommend? Get
them all to talk to each other and fight.
I
I think, and we've talked about this in some of our discussions, is anybody in here familiar with the software bill of materials? Yeah. Oh, guess what? Now you got to have AI bill of materials. So software bill of materials means you understand all of the packages, types, products, and everything in your environment, the vendors, so that when there is a vulnerability, you can say, as your boss has come to you and you know it, do we have that? Are we safe from this? And you want to be able to quickly look and say, oh, we don't have that in our environment. We don't need to worry about it. You're going to need that for AI. You're going to need a list of all of your AI vendors, where that AI is spread like peanut butter across your organization, and how you can extract it if something happens and it needs to get out of your environment.
Sounds easy.
It's a breeze. Call me.
All right, Adam, take us beyond threat detection. What else can we do?
So I think it's great, right, that AI is accelerating the speed that defenders can take both preventive and detective measures against code. But we need to make sure that that defender is running in the right direction. And the first way that we can do that is by realizing that AI is not the solution to every problem. So if you're thinking about defending and creating the large training model that you need to, for example, be able to detect a malicious user or a rogue AI on your network, make sure you're using that data lake and you're feeding that data lake with reliable, clean information, and that data lake's defended as I mentioned earlier, as a crown jewel. When it comes to attacks from the outside, like the phishing attacks that we talked about earlier, AI is not going to detect all of those attacks, but there are deterministic security technologies designed to render all presented content safe, like CDR and RBI are two examples there. And we've seen those technologies be quite effective against adversarial AI that's operating in a high-risk environment like the public internet. We can further harden some of that, and what we do at Everfox is harden that to government standards by using hardware-enforced security. So making sure through deterministic hardware rather than software that could be exploited and subverted by an adversary, using that deterministic hardware to ensure that there is a transformation from risky content to known safe content. And finally, I think treating those AIs as insiders. If you create an AI properly and if you train that AI properly, you have created the ultimate insider. It's that guy who has worked at the office for 40 years. Nobody's quite sure what they do, but everybody knows that when they have a question, you go to that guy and he'll find the email from 17 years ago between 5 other people who no longer work there and him that answers your question, which is great from an employee and productivity standpoint, but for the adversary who comes there and can just ask that guy instead of having to dig through 40 years of email once you've identified that guy and gotten into his mailbox, it becomes a quick answer. So making sure that you're monitoring that AI, seeing what kind of answers they're giving and to whom can definitely mitigate a lot of that risk of AI as an ultimate insider that an adversary might turn to their own advantage.
I think thinking about some of those, and I put those right in that zero trust, right, model. I want to zero trust our brains to really not trust anything you see online by default, and instead verify everything. So of course, using multi-factor authentication and all the things, including if you're in a large organization or small organization, you're doing financial transactions. We've seen deepfakes used to try to manipulate or get employees to send money somewhere where they shouldn't. But like also for families, I think this means like old school multi-factor authentication, like a secret word that you have among your family, where you know it, they know it, but no one else does, and you can verify that way. If you feel suspicious on a call, hang up and call the person back using the contact information you already have for them existing in your phone, and think before you post, especially making sure where you post personal or family pictures has tight privacy settings. Now, if you're looking and trying to determine, is this actually a fake, deep fake? Is this manipulated? Is this generated whole scale? You can look at metadata behind that image or video, compression data, for weird imperfections like distorted hands, feet, accessories that shouldn't be there, anything that kind of looks out of place. But I'll caveat that with that used to be easier. Now the imagery has gotten so much better, it's really hard for the naked eye to pick it up just by ourselves. And that's why it's critical for new developers or just developers who are creating new tools to put in preventative measures to help verify content and stop actors from being able to use their tools for nefarious purposes. For example, continuing to support technical standards for publishers, creators, consumers to have the ability to trace the origin of the different types of media, like I see 2PA up there, hyperlinked, I think when those slides go live, really figuring out ways to say this content is my content, that Cynthia Kaiser made this video about Cynthia Kaiser. But like then I think going back to the discussion I had earlier on the child sexual abuse material, FBI has been engaging with developers to see if we can prevent their tools from being used to create such material. And some instances, and we've seen a little bit of increase in reporting to the FBI of this types of material, and that's due in large part to the guardrails that developers have been able to put onto their programs, their tools, and then when they see people trying to jailbreak, they're reporting it to the FBI. So it's helping us find more people doing these heinous crimes. And that really highlights how critical it is for responsible AI development to continue and how important it's going to continue to be if we're really going to counter significant threats. So I want to wrap things up and talk about how organizations are thinking about or changing around this threat. Lynn, what should organizations be thinking about?
Well, I think they should be monitoring this area in particular because the legal and regulatory landscape with respect to AI is evolving very quickly. They need to be able to navigate this complex set of changing requirements. In particular, I think there's a natural linkage between AI and our current privacy laws that companies in particular need to be cognizant of, because one of the benefits of AI is the processing of large data sets. Well, that invariably can involve large quantities of individual information, personal information, and that's regulated by the state privacy laws. So I think they need to kind of take that into consideration. Think about developing AI governance frameworks. Think about your AI policies and procedures and the uses of AI. Generally, we recommend that AI, it can be a valuable time-saving tool, but it shouldn't necessarily substitute for human judgment, particularly with respect to personnel decisions, let's say. That seems to be particularly fraught with adverse legal consequences. And then just to circle back to where we started with the DPRK, IT worker fraud, think about that pervasive problem in your hiring processes, and think about red flags, with the education that doesn't quite check out, the person that doesn't quite seem to appear on camera, the work that's spotty. Think about your mitigation strategies and just have kind of a whole of corporation, if you will, approach, recognizing the good aspects of AI, which can be used consistent with current laws and good corporate governance policies, and then how those malicious cyber actors could try and penetrate a company and be an insider threat.
And I think as we're looking at having adversaries integrating AI, at least to make them more efficient, I mean, how many people have seen kind of the fantastical numbers of how much more phishing emails are happening now versus a year ago? I can't verify those numbers. I'm not sure how you verify them, the thousands of % increased numbers, but really, I hope that businesses know that as they might be experiencing maybe not increased sophistication yet, but increased scale of types of attacks, that they can come to the FBI. The most important thing to know about the FBI is we are a victim-centric organization, and that includes helping victims after the worst day of their business or their lives, when they've been hit by a cyber attack, as well as before, using the intelligence we have to be able to share out information, provide out threat information for net defenders, and conduct proactive defense operations to take away adversary infrastructure that's doing it in the first place. In particular, for AI companies, we are engaging with Frontier Model and other AI companies to provide threat intel, discuss any of these types of incidents, we noted before, and improve the resilience of AI systems. There's a really good playbook out there, an AI collaboration playbook that FBI and CISA created together to really work towards having a lot of shared interest in this space. And I'm going to say it again, I can't emphasize enough how important responsible AI development is to make sure we're using this really cool new tech for good and not evil. That's why I'm actually really excited to be up here with all the folks up here today, especially Sherrod. You talked about some of the really cool things Microsoft's doing internally to think like, how do we need to be different? Is there anything you kind of want to hit home for us at like how Microsoft's really positioning itself around the problem?
Microsoft really sees this as an evolution. This is, something that I say a lot of times is that the A in AI really can stand for acceleration. It is extending the scope, scale, and speed. It's a tool. Anybody here ever used a computer on a command line? Ever used a command line? Okay. So back in the old days, we had command line only computers like DOS 311 and things, and you had to type in what you wanted. And just Linux still uses, command line if you don't install a window manager and a GUI. So you'd have to type in the command line what you wanted the computer to do to access your data. And then what did we get after that? A GUI. You can point and click your way to heaven. You could look at something, you could see it, you could click on it. All of a sudden, you were able to interact with your data in a way that was so much easier. AI is the next interface to our data in this evolution. We started with command line, we got the GUI, now we have AI. It is a natural language interface to data that threat actors also have. And so every fun, cool, exciting efficiency and neat thing that you do with AI, threat actors are doing the same in a mirror on the malicious side. So I think it's really important to know that for every capability the tool has for our use for good, as defenders, the threat actors are using it for malicious purposes too, because now they also have that new interface to their data.
So, I have these kind of two feelings whenever we're talking about all this, that like, this is all really scary, but the work we're all doing in this space is also really cool.
Oh, we're hitting it hard.
We're doing it.
We're working.
And I think pivoting to meet these threats isn't going to be easy, but one common trait I feel like among all of us on stage, and probably like a lot of people in this room, is a love of tackling hard questions. I take a lot of optimism from the tenacity and creativity across the cybersecurity community, because there really are like technical, policy, and human ways that we can counter malicious actors' use of AI to try to use it against us. With that, thank you all. We can take a few questions. I think we have a few minutes.
Raise your hand if you use AI in your personal life. Raise your hand if you use it at work. Raise your hand if you have a question.
We got one.
Yeah. Has Microsoft identified and made available, or will they make available, a way for us to determine if deepfakes are real? Because that's where we've got substantial risk.
That's a great question. So Microsoft has done a significant amount of work to counter deepfakes, including that lawsuit that was brought for Storm 2139 in Virginia. However, it's difficult, and we are continuing to refine the resources that we have available to the public. And there was one recently released, I want to say it was a week ago. If you just go to Microsoft AI training, if you search that, it's like a 15-part series of not just how to use AI, but how to be a consumer of AI content and AI products. It's fantastic training, and it's very interesting, and it gives some insight into those things.
See, the challenge is, got an executive that wants to put their image out there to show customers and internal folks how to do stuff, and if somebody manipulates that, it gets really scary.
That's where I would lean back really heavily on classic social engineering training, which is looking for the hallmarks of urgency, emotion, and habit. If someone is trying to inspire an emotion from you to take a habit that you normally take immediately, that's a red light. That's a red flag. And you can do that with a deep fake, or you can do it with a real one too.
And one of the things that I would add, though, we talk a lot about deepfakes for good reason, but think about this as a broader problem. The idea of data provenance and data labeling, and needing to get not labeled as bad, because bad guys are never going to label their stuff as bad, but labeling is good, right? Figuring out how to label that known, verified, upcoming, I'm very excited about it, biopic about Cynthia Kaiser by Cynthia Kaiser. And having that out there and saying, this is verified as good, rather than, and through both human readable and technical indica. And that's going to both feed good content into our models and make it easier for viewers to know what's good and what's not.
Yeah, that's the two sides, right? Making what you make or a company makes verified, and then figuring out the detection methods around detecting that fake. And we need both to be able to really get at the problem.
So I think that is the crux of a lot of AI governance is data governance. But it's the big elephant. We've had 25 years to deal with it, and most organizations have done zero. DLP is this thing we put around the organization. It alerts sometimes. Lateral movement doesn't exist. Privacy attorneys largely create policies that say destruction, but nothing's actually ever destroyed. And to your point, we're left with that technical debt of decades, right? and decades going back before that, right, too. And I don't know. I mean, you've got to convince the front end in a very large data strategy to fix that problem, to get to, a data labeling. Do you have any thoughts just as to how do we fully convince people to change that?
It's a really good question.
Well, you've got a good point. Data governance is an important part of privacy governance, and I think it's going to be an increasingly important part for AI as well. And part of a records management process, which should include AI, needs to include not just how you retain and maintain data, but how you destroy data. And you're right, frequently organizations are good at the retaining, the collecting and the retaining. They're not very good at the destruction piece. And that becomes a vulnerability, particularly for threat actors that are compromising data that's been stored, when maybe it was past its shelf life and should have been on a deletion schedule.
I almost wonder, and this is a wonder, not a knowledge, whether though with some of the integration of AI and people really thinking about this and companies thinking about it, it's new. So you can reinvigorate some of the cyber conversations and data conversations in organizations that may have been almost kind of playing catch up on other things before. And so being able to try to use AI and the increased then tools that you might be bringing onto your network to really have those conversations is something I'm interested to see how that turns out over time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. AI as a driver for the conversations about the discussions that we as cyber professionals have thought are long overdue, right? Zero trust. What does it really mean? Not just what does the checkbox list of the day say? How do you transform your network into something that is more oriented around data labeling, known good, and data governance?
We've answered every AI question out there. Amazing. We got to go tell all the developers. Thank you all. We've really appreciated having you today.
Thank you.